Today we're going to be talking about ethical issues in technology. I'm going to be picking on Facebook a lot. I think Facebook is really easy to pick on. I think it really shows that Mark Zuckerberg is coming at things from a position where he's not an ordinary person. It doesn't face a lot of things that ordinary people face, or um, the and that his inability to put himself in the shoes of his users is relatively easy to spot, and so it's kind of easy to pick on Facebook. It is not, however, a story just about Facebook. It is not just about Facebook. There is a lot going on in the technology world. There's a lot going on with your data. There's a lot going on with other websites, and with a much larger ecosystem of stuff that's going on. And so some of what I talk about is going to talk about that broader ecosystem, but I am going to pick on Facebook a lot. So let's buckle in here. So what are we going to talk about? Today, we're first going to look at users as stakeholders and data subjects as stakeholders. And I think to really understand the ethical issues around data, it's really important to understand data subjects. It's really important to understand data subjects and what that means, what that entails, and that is not necessarily users, that users are a subset of data stakeholders, but that there's a broader universe of data stakeholders and of data subjects, and that those data subjects are and that you can become a data subject in a million different ways, not just via the way that you behave online. We're going to talk about some privacy issues. Now, this is this is the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg that we're going to be able to talk about today. There's so much more to say about privacy, but I'll give you just a quick thumbnail sketch of some of what I think is important here. We're going to talk about online harassment. There is a content warning in here. There's a content warning in here. In fact, it's so substantial a content warning that at one point I will stop and say, if you need to leave the class and come back in 10 minutes, I promise to cover this subject in 10 minutes so that you can safely come back. I'm going to make that offer to you because it will turn your stomach, even if you're ready to stay in and listen. And then we'll, time permitting, we'll talk about misinformation. I will invite you all to maybe set aside some pre-existing beliefs or views about this and have a discussion with me after class if you are not on the same page as me about this, just so we can get through it. But I think it's important to say that there's a tremendous amount of, I just realized my microphone's like all the way across the room. Is this better? Probably a little clearer, right? Yes. So without inviting debate or disagreement about whether facts are facts, sorry to put it a little snarkily, but that's literally what I'm trying to avoid, is a debate over things that are well established. We're going to talk about some of the systems that contribute to online misinformation. So again, first, users as stakeholders, and also data subjects as stakeholders, but the users as stakeholders is the easier one. Now I want to literally ask you to ask for answers from you as a participating class. So think about yourself as a user of Facebook or Twitter or Google, right? And I want you to think about what kind of stakeholder you are, and think about the classifications that we did earlier. So first, I'd like a volunteer to answer the question: are users of online services internal or external stakeholders?
I would think external stakeholders.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Brendan. That is correct. And why is that?
Well, the internal stakeholders, you're thinking about, your employees, so the people working in, Facebook's office or Instagram office, the people managing those employees. I don't have a say as a user in the inner workings of a company, how they work. I'm not paid by the company. Maybe, I don't know, I'd like to, something that just popped into my head, I'd like to hear your input on is, how would influencers fit into, like Instagram influencers? I pay I'm from Chanel and I give one of our handbags to an Instagram influencer. Does that internalize them in some way?
That's a good question. I like that question. My thought is probably not, because you're still not really within the organization. You're still not really within the organization. So even if you have, 10 million followers, right, you still are not within. You're still not within the organization. You're still not part of the company. And that's what we mean when we say, are you internal or external? Now, that doesn't mean you're not important, right? I mean, if you have 10 million followers and you say, hey, this company has done me wrong, right? I'm going to take my 10 million followers and go over to this other social network, then that could be a real threat to the company. That doesn't mean the company doesn't have some more interest in the really visible users who are influencers, right? The I can't think of a high profile example of where well, there, a lot of folks have said, forget Twitter, I'm going over to Parler, right, for instance. And so I think that those the social networks have to be willing to look at make a calculation about, are we willing to lose this type of user or that type of user, based on their, and that those calculations are going to be different if you have 10 million followers than if you have 10 followers. So I think that does matter, but I think they're probably still external. Good question. Okay, and finally, not finally, but additionally, are they primary or are they secondary stakeholders? What do you think? This is the harder one. Primary, yes, that's right. And why is that?
Because they help influence like things that happen, but not super majorly, I would say, to like the extent of like competitors and whatnot. Like how competitors will shape things differently. They don't have as much of a stake in the company as a user.
Sure, that's right. That's right. So the in this particular case, though, I also want you to think about how much a set of stakeholders is essential to the company's business model. Is essential to the company's business model. Competitors are not essential to your business model. If your competitors all go away, you're in a lot of ways better off. In some ways, it can be less well off, like we talked about, but overall, probably even better off if your competitors all go away. But if your users all go away, you don't have a network. You don't have a network. And it's probably worth noting here something called network effects. This is an important concept, and I want you all to think about this and squirrel it away in the back of your brains, because once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere. Network effects. Right. And to illustrate this, I want you to imagine a world in which there's one fax machine. There's one fax machine. What value does one fax machine have?
It's high demand.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, so if there's one fax machine in your town and fax machines are broadly a thing, then yeah, there's high demand. So like back in the day when fax machines were really expensive and people would often like go to Kinko's to get access to a fax machine or something like that. Yeah, that's right. But no, in the whole world, imagine in the whole world, there's only one fax machine. What can you do with that fax machine? Who are you going to fax?
No one.
Yeah, I would say it's pretty much useless. Yeah. It's like, why are you going to incorporate fax machines into your network if there's only one fax machine?
Exactly. If I'm not using it to send and receive faxes, which is increasingly the direction we're heading, pretty much only the medical industry still uses faxes. The sometimes lawyers every so often. But if there's nobody to send or receive a fax to or from, then what your fax machine is just a copier, right? With a useless, and maybe you could also use it as a phone, right? Because other people presumably would still have phones, but it's not as a fax machine. It doesn't. There's no added value there. Whereas if 10 million people or 100 million people or a billion people have fax machines, then it's really valuable. It's really valuable. So you want you only want in on some kinds of systems because other people are in on those systems. There are systems where the interaction with other people requires that other people adopt those things for them to be useful to you, right? So I don't use, many of you use WhatsApp. Any of you WhatsApp users? Yes, Bernardo, Monica, probably a couple more on the second screen here I'm not seeing. Maybe some of you with your cameras off, right? Why do you use WhatsApp?
I use it to contact my family that lives in Brazil.
Right.
I've pretty much on a daily basis.
I have family that lives abroad, and so I use them. I use WhatsApp to contact them regularly. That is absolutely the WhatsApp user base in the U.S. In other countries, WhatsApp has a domestic user base for people who only use it domestically as well. But there's not a lot of adoption among folks who use WhatsApp domestically because that there is, other than folks who use it internationally, there's not a lot of WhatsApp base of users in the U.S. So because I don't have family that lives abroad. I mean, like I have like an uncle who lives in South America, and I'm not especially close with him, that sort of thing, right? There's no need for me to have WhatsApp. I don't use it because the people in my network don't use it. But if all of a sudden everyone on my network is like, forget Facebook Messenger, that thing is garbage, which not a terrible point to make. Forget Facebook Messenger, we're not going to use it. We're all going to switch to WhatsApp. Then maybe that's how I start getting in touch with people. Or if everyone stopped using email, right? Then that's and started using WhatsApp. All of a sudden, I'm going to have to adopt WhatsApp, or stop using the plain old telephone system, as it's often called, right? Okay, well, I've got to adopt something else. Maybe WhatsApp is a solution. So. If you are a social network, you want to be on the winning side of that network effect. It's crucially important for you to be on the winning side of that network effect. I know a lot of people who still have Friendster accounts, or at least in principle have or had Friendster accounts. Most of them stopped logging into them so long ago that they've lost them. Right, I'm one of them. I don't ask me what my Friendster password is. I have no idea. I had a Friendster account back when Friendster was a thing. Friendster is no longer a thing. And why would I log back in? Because there's no one there, right? So it's not that any individual user coming or going is that essential to a social media network or another business that is subject to network effects. But it's that it means that if you only have 10% of the market and you're not on the way up, you're in real trouble. I mean, if you have 10% of the market in retail clothing, like you're good, you're fantastic. And if that dips to 8, that's bad. You could get back to 12, you could get to 15. It's not, I mean, like it's not the end of the world. But in technologies where we have these network effects, you have this sort of tipping point where all of a sudden everybody goes from one network to another, and then the one that everyone leaves en masse is suddenly dead. And so Facebook is desperate to not have that happen to them. I mean, it'd be hard, it'd be difficult to take them down. They're pushing something like 2 billion users at this point. But if that number starts going the other direction because another network starts to take off, we've seen this happen sequentially over and over again, where technologies rise and fall and rise and fall. From which peer-to-peer network are you using, to which messaging app are you using, to which social media network are you using. So those network effects make the users as a horde a really important primary stakeholder that can make or break one of these businesses. I also want to talk, though, about whether users are engaged in informed consent, whether they really give their informed consent. And the very short version is probably not, right? How many of you in the last month, just a quick raise of a hand, have clicked on an end user agreement? Right? I'm sure more of you have, and you just don't even realize that you did. Like, you're just not even the ones I'm seeing who didn't raise your hands. I'm almost certain you have, at least for an update on your phone, or when you installed something, you've almost surely clicked on an end user agreement. And now, how many of you read any end user agreement in any detail in the last month? Right? And you're all seriously shaking your head. I don't read them And I've taken classes at a law school, right? I don't read them, and I write about this stuff. Like I don't, why am I going to waste my time reading these things? They're deliberately long. They're deliberately written to be incomprehensible. I read about one study where a law professor gave them out to second and third year law students, and they couldn't make heads or tails of them. They specifically said, like, assigned them, read this and tell me what's in here, and then gave them a test on it, and they did terrible. Right. So if you're not, if you're not even reading them, but then even if you are reading them, they're incomprehensible, the answer is that you're really not giving meaningful, informed consent. And so at that point, the treatment that companies are giving end users is not it really doesn't look like a fair partnership where it's like, hey, I'm going to offer you this service. You're going to promise to behave XYZ way. Let's be buddies. It's more like, I just need you to agree to everything that indemnifies me, that gives me the company as no legal liability for anything that happens to you on this network or with this software or whatever. And then I'm gonna make that a condition of you being able to use this. And again, to come back to network effects, because it's, I installed this app, I sign up for the service, or I can't talk to my family abroad, right? I installed this app, or I can't follow what my family is doing with their pictures and birthdays and all that stuff. Then it's either agree to this thing that I'm not going to read, and then if I do, I'm not even going to be able to understand it, or get something that's socially really valuable to me. That's not really a sort of a fair offer, if you will. Okay, so we've gotten users as stakeholders, but I want to have a different concept here, which is the data subject. What do I mean by a data subject? Well, to visualize it, I mean the person who is the subject of data that is collected, analyzed, bought and sold, used. Right? The person who is the subject of data, where the data is about a person that is collected, analyzed, bought, sold, used. The European Union has a policy on data subjects. It's called the European General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. The book talks about that in passing. If any of you do any business in Europe, you're going to have to at least have a passing familiarity with the GDPR, because it's going to affect how you can do business in Europe. And the GDPR defines a data subject as an identifiable natural person is one who can be identified directly or indirectly, in particular by reference to an identifier such as a name, an identification number, location data, an online identifier, or to one or more factors specific to the physical, physiological, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity of that natural person. So that's a really long way of saying a data subject is someone who has data about them collected and then used or processed in some way. Right? So keep in mind that you are not necessarily agreeing to be a data subject in any given context, right? Like you do not consent to, you're not even told that your license plate is collected by automated police scanners that are scattered throughout major cities around the country. I bet you didn't know that, but it's happening all day, every day across the country, where the police are using automated license plate scanners to tell who's driving where. Right now, in principle, they're looking for stolen cars. They've found a lot of other cool uses. Cool by police standards, not necessarily cool depending on your privacy sensitivity. They found a lot of other interesting uses for that data. So a data subject in this case, are they internal or external to the company that's collecting, using, harvesting, selling the data? I'm going to call on someone. Okay. Brendan's already participated. Thank you. I appreciate that. Robert. Robert, are they internal or external to the company?
Mike was off. I feel like I don't know. I don't know. Probably internal. I would say
What?
intern.
Why would you
I
say
I don't know. I mean, I feel like you know. I don't know. To be honest, I have no idea. To be brutally honest.
okay, that's okay. That's okay. Someone else new for today want to jump in? Vineet, what do you think? Internal or external?
I guess
I'm sorry, you broke up just a little bit. What was that?
I was saying I guess it's internal.
Yeah? Why internal and not external?
Okay. I'm gonna try. I'm not sure, but I think because it comes up to the stakeholder, like the company, to treat or to take care of the data, and then I don't know. I'm not sure.
That's okay. That's okay. Monica.
Professor, I want to say they are external because these are social interest groups that want to know what we're thinking, what we buy, what we do online. Also trade associations, like groups that want us to probably follow them because we have this certain way of thinking, and I could potentially belong to that group. And the mass media and competitors, they want to know if I'm buying shoes, that they can offer me a lot of a wide variety of shoes so I can potentially buy them.
Sure. So I think that those are important players to keep in mind here. Your pressure groups in particular around data privacy and data fairness are increasingly important and prominent. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, based in the Bay Area, is a big one there. I also really like groups like Public Knowledge, which is based in DC and is much more focused on sort of legislation and regulatory efforts. I actually interned at Public Knowledge in 2006. And those folks are all advocating on our behalf as data subjects, right? But I'll just tell you all the answer. We as data subjects are external to the company, right? So even if you're a spoiler alert, I'll get to this later in the lecture. Even if you're not on Facebook, Facebook is collecting data about you. And that just like Facebook users are external stakeholders, other folks that Facebook collects data about are also external to the company. So you're not, so internal versus external is internal is, do you have an employment relationship or an ownership relationship with the company? So are you an employee? Are you a manager? Are you an owner? If any of those are your relationship, you're internal to the company. Otherwise, you're external. You're external to the company, which shapes how you can, how much power you have over how the company behaves. And we're getting a little behind on time, so I'll just give you the answer here. They are also, unlike users who are primary stakeholders, data subjects, I would argue, are secondary stakeholders. So when I set up the primary versus secondary dichotomy, and when the textbook sets that up, and when other scholars about this subject set this up, a lot of what they're asking is, if these people walk away, do these people have the power to walk away in a way that directly harms your fundamental business model? If your users walk away you don't have a social network. If your users walk away, you don't have a social network. But in the cases we're talking about where you're not a user, but they're collecting data about you anyway, in that role, you don't really have the power to walk away. Not in a meaningful way. You could not have a Facebook account and they can still track your behavior as you're going around to every site that has a Facebook like button, every site that has a share to Facebook button. Facebook is tracking you as you do that. Now you, for the most part, can't really, most people do not have the technical skill to opt out of that. Therefore, most people don't have the ability to walk away in a way that harms this business model, that takes this business model off of the table for these companies. Think about other folks who harvest and sell data, such as Experian, right, and your other credit agencies. You are not their customers. You are their product. You're not their customer. You're Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. You are not their customer. You are their product. And you have no legal right to say, stop collecting data about me. I don't want you to track all of my credit transactions across the economy. You have no ability to walk away from that ecosystem as a data subject. So you're a secondary stakeholder because there's nothing you can do in your ordinary economic decision making where you can pull yourself off of the table and say, stop collecting data about me. Right. Now, if Chase Bank goes to Equifax and says, we don't want your credit reports anymore, that's a primary stakeholder. That's a customer. Equifax Chase is gonna have Equifax's attention like that. Right? But if you go to Equifax and say, I'm not really comfortable with you collecting all this data about me, they'll pat you on the head and send you on your way. Thank you. So again, Facebook is tracking non-users all around the internet. So in this sense, you're just a data subject. If you don't use Facebook, but you use the internet, and there are a very few people who don't use the internet, but if you're not a Facebook user, but you do use the internet, you're a data subject for them, and you don't really have the power to walk away.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Do we have any law in the US that that's like against big companies collecting data?
Oh no, we really don't.
Because I know in Europe they do.
Yes. So, well, I shouldn't say no, we don't. There is a more limited one. It's not nearly as big or as all-encompassing as the GDPR in Europe. But there is a law in California that just passed a couple years ago that has some impact on this. It's much more limited, though, than what the GDPR does. So we have no federal law that does anything like this. So that Facebook does something like this is so there is a law tracking what you do with financial information. So Equifax actually is regulated. TransUnion, Experian, they are regulated in what they can share with who they can share your creditworthiness information with. It's not that limiting, but there are some restrictions, but it doesn't, but I mean, like the big, when they had sloppy security practices, I forget which one of the three, and there was the huge data, I think it was Equifax, the huge data breach. You have no legal recourse against them. But financial information is sometimes regulated. Educational information has some regulations to it. So if I send your transcript to your mother without your consent, my boss is going to have a real stern talking to with me, and your lawyers could have a real stern talking to with the university. So that's why I don't do those things. Financial, educational, medical records are probably the most regulated, but even then, what counts as a medical record is much smaller than what you think it is. So, like for instance, lots of medical information, no regulations, nothing. Apple can do anything they want with it. So
data means different things, correct?
Yeah, yeah. It means it can mean anything about you collected. However, is what I
Okay.
mean by data here.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Just real quick, I don't know if anyone would be interested. There's a program on Netflix that I just saw recently called Spycraft. If you have any interest in how some of these things work with being able to retract information, they pretty much lay it out pretty detailed. It's pretty astonishing, some of the information they can retrieve.
Spycraft. I've not heard of that one. Let me pull that up. Thanks. Yeah. Give that a shot. This, yes? Cool. So that's, yeah, and we'll talk about spies versus private sector folks in about 3 slides here. And so as you go about here, and I'm not asking for class participation, but as you think about these relationships in the lecture today, and as we come back to stakeholder relationships more broadly, I want you always to be asking about any relationship between a company and a given set of stakeholders. I want you to be asking, are these relationships based on mutual respect? Are they fair and equitable? Are they balanced or are they imbalanced? Right. So if it's Boeing and United Airlines, that's probably pretty balanced. How about the relationship between Facebook and you? Probably somewhat less balanced. Right. But I'll let you come to those conclusions. Okay, all of which sets up a more explicit discussion of privacy. We already talked about this, how, and this is just one of thousands of articles that find stuff like this, that seemingly banal information that you do online can help people identify things about you that you did not explicitly make clear online, right? So if I just by what I like, I'm unintentionally telling you my education level, my sexual preference, probably my age, my just the fact that I'm on Facebook kind of, it might suggest my age. Can tell you my gender identity and sexual preference, can tell you a lot about my income, that sort of thing. So I'm inadvertently telling the world a lot about who I am without meaning to do so. And in most cases without understanding this. I mean, even though I study this stuff, it's incomprehensible for me to grasp how these algorithms can produce these kinds of results. I don't have the technical expertise, even though I have even though I can go in and do the research and understand the results that studies like this find. Right. And so what are some of the results that can happen here in real life? I've got just a couple kind of scary examples, right? For instance, the story in Splinter, Facebook recommended that this psychiatrist patients friend each other. Do not like. Where's my dislike button? Okay, I'm going to read you a little bit from the article here. Facebook's ability to figure out the people we might know is sometimes eerie. Many a Facebook user has been creeped out when a one-time Tinder date or an ex-boss from 10 years ago suddenly pops up as a friend recommendation. How does the big blue giant know? While some of these incredibly accurate friend suggestions are amusing, others are alarming, such as this story from Lisa, asterisk, not her real name, a psychiatrist who is an infrequent Facebook user, mostly signing into RSVP for events. Last summer, she noticed that the social network had started recommending her patients as friends, and she had no idea why. I haven't shared my email or phone contacts with Facebook, she told me over the phone. The next week, things got weirder. Most of her patients are senior citizens or people with serious health or developmental issues, but she has one outlier, a 30-something snowboarder. Usually, Facebook would recommend people his own age who snowboard and jump out of planes. But Lisa told me that he had started seeing older and infirm people, such as a 70-year-old gentleman with a walker and someone with cerebral palsy. He laughed and said, I don't know any of these people who showed up on my list. I'm guessing they see you? recounted Lisa. He showed me the list of friend recommendations, and I recognized some of my patients. She sat there awkwardly and silently. To let him know that his suspicion was correct would violate her duty to protect her patient's privacy. Another one of her female patients had a friend recommendation pop up for a fellow patient she recognized from the office's elevator. Suddenly, she knew the other patient's full name along with all their Facebook profile information. It's a massive privacy fail, said Lisa. I have patients with HIV, people that have attempted suicide, and women in coercive and violent relationships, right? And Facebook is recommending these people to each other in a way that outs that they're seeing a psychiatrist, that they're seeing this psychiatrist, and that's all. And I think the people at Facebook just didn't think about how this might happen. Just didn't think through some of the ways that this might be deployed in a way that could harm these stakeholders. I really think it's just literally a blind spot for this company in the way that they deployed this. I personally have found my friend recommendations to be less creepy over time. And so I think once this was brought to their attention, then there was some like, oh, we didn't even think of that, right? But if you were in a different position than is common for tech developers in Silicon Valley, then maybe you would have been more likely to think through this potential outcome. There's another article here. I've got a link in it. It's about how Facebook outs sex workers. Same thing. Sex workers who have found their clients recommended to them as friends, even though they do not use their Facebook profile for this particular profession. Obviously, they're very strongly interested in keeping, their normal life and their sex work life very separate, and Facebook collapses that context in a way that, in this case, we're talking about not just embarrassment, but real potential physical and emotional danger for them. Button. But data privacy, when we think about data privacy, we often think about social media. And I think that's because that's the one that's staring us in the face all the time, right? Privacy, social media is to privacy as gas prices are to inflation. Right? Social media is to privacy as gas prices are to inflation. Gas prices are staring us in the face all the time. I couldn't tell you exactly how much I paid for my 2 loaves of bread that I got at this lovely 2-pack at this warehouse store that I'm going to stop promoting explicitly. But I buy it all the time. I know roughly what it costs, but I don't remember exactly. And if it's, it could be up by 50 cents and I would not notice. If gas was up by 50 cents, I would definitely notice. Since because you've got this sign staring you at the face everywhere you drive around town. Right. And so because gas is more visible, gas prices are unfairly get an unfairly large share of our mindset about where inflation is at, whether prices are going up or down, right? Especially because gas is so volatile. I mean, like gas is not a fair representation of inflation at all, actually. But that's why the economists of the world take it out when they're looking at core inflation. But because it's in our face, that's what we think about all the time. Social media is that it's in our face all the time, so that's what we think about for privacy. But that's because there's this whole world. That's even though there's this whole world of other privacy concerns and collecting and using of our data that we just don't even think about. On a day-to-day basis. And that's even though sometimes it is staring us in the face. Why do you think Safeway gives you $1 off milk to swipe that card? It's not because they're under any illusion that King Soopers doesn't also have a card. They know that, right? Or that Whole Foods doesn't have. I mean, Whole Foods has a whole ecosystem now. You got to be part of the Amazon Club with the Amazon Prime and the card and all that stuff. And if you have all that, then you get all these really big savings, right? So that's much more complicated. But it's not, we've got this card that's going to make them more loyal to us. I hate the card system. I think it's a terrible system. It's inefficient. It's especially when you try to add the digital coupon in the store and then it doesn't work, and then you've got to bring the manager over and say, I want my $1 off on my blueberries, right? Like it's it's a Rube Goldberg contraption that makes the shopping experience much worse. The reason they do this, the reason they have these cards, is because then they get all this data about you and they sell it out the backside of the store. They do it because they get all this data about you, and that gives them an additional revenue stream that they can use to, because think about it, when you sign up, you tell them your address, which means they can tell where you're at, what neighborhood you're in, which already tells the world a whole lot about you. Already tells the world a whole lot about you. I mean, like, I live in Wash Park. For those of you who know Denver, that tells you a lot about me. That tells you a tremendous amount about me to know that I live in Wash Park, right? And so you know my zip code, you already probably have a pretty good sense of what my interests are, of my demographic profile, just that alone. But then I give them my phone number and my email address. And then in combination with other databases that already have all this stuff, they're going to be able to tell you my age, whether I have a college degree, whether I have a graduate degree, what other parts of the country I've lived in, how often I travel, where I like to go, what my interests are, what my hobbies are, what magazines I subscribe to, right? And so they combined that with, or more likely they sell the grocery purchasing data to a data broker that already has all that information. And then you tack on, oh, he really likes Twinkies, but only on the second week of the month. That's weird. I wonder what's going on. Maybe that tells them something about me. I do have an unreasonable love of Twinkies, by the way. Not quite like Woody Harrelson in Zombieland, but like close. But so that by combining that grocery data with, buying that grocery purchasing data from a grocery store and combining it with other data that I've gotten from magazines, from retailers, from wholesalers, from car companies, from all of the other places that are also collecting this data about you and selling it out the back door to data brokers, then these people can assemble tremendously sophisticated profiles about you that help them understand how you buy, how you sell, whether you're whether you're in the market for a new car. Oh man, they love that information. Whether you just bought a house, man, in addition to buying a house, which is a very, very big purchase, but the furniture and the curtains and maybe the new car and the hardware supplies and all the stuff that you have to buy to go with after you buy a house, like, man, they love that information. That's really valuable information to marketers. So by contributing to this, grocery stores get an additional revenue source that helps them keep prices low. And that's why they keep the prices low for the card members, is not because they think you're special or they think that you think they're special or that there's some sort of special relationship. It's because that allows them to better track you. And that data is valuable. Right. Think about your phone company too. And this is something you probably weren't thinking about. I study this stuff. And when this article came out in Advertising Age in 2015, it was news to me. I didn't think about it. Right. The $24 billion data business that telcos don't want to talk about. Mobile carriers are working with partners to manage, package, and sell data. Right. And this is from 5 years ago. I'm sure this number is more like 50 billion now. Think about all of the information. Think about all of the information that my mobile carrier has about me, including where I'm at all times. Now you combine that with what websites am I looking up? What apps am I installing? What are some of the phone calls that I make? A lot, we think about, oh, my privacy is I don't want you to know my friends and my social networks and that sort of things. And there's a lot of potential value there, but some of the more commercially valuable information is which stores do you call? What stores do you call? If you call the same pizza plates every week, that's valuable information. If you call, and sometimes it's really sensitive too. There are, think about all of the medical problems, that you could be revealing to the world based on the phone numbers that you call. Right. I think it's great that there are suicide hotlines out there. If any of you are ever feeling suicidal or know someone who's feeling suicidal, please get them on this hotline. Right. The fact that you've made that call, that's something your telco knows, and they're selling that information out the back door. You know, that you call Planned Parenthood, that's something your telco knows, and they're selling that information out the back door. These are hugely sensitive bits of information, and it's in the. If you look real closely in your terms of service with your mobile provider, it's in there. They tell you that they're doing this. They don't really want you to know. When Advertising Age called them Advertising Age, a company dedicated to people who want to sell you things. Right? When Advertising Age, the magazine, called the telecom companies and said, I want to talk to you about this business that you have selling your users' data out the back door, no comment. They don't even want to talk to an advertising magazine about this. And I keep using this term. I want to make it a little bit more explicit. That term is data brokers. A data broker is a company that collects your data or buys collections of data, assembles it, refines it, and sells it to other people who want to sell you things. I found this really illustrative graphic that helps show some of what they do, right? So there are, for instance, there are 4,000 data broker companies worldwide. That's a lot of companies. And that's, you know, how many clothing retailers are there in the United States, right? You know, that's this. I mean, this is it's not that big, but it's a major industry. It's a major sector. You know, 1.4 thousand leading brands sell information from store loyalty cards. Right. So pretty much any store loyalty card that you sign up for, you can assume that that they're contributing to this economy. 80% of US email addresses are on file. Axiom, one of the largest data brokering companies, has 23,000 servers. 23,000. Think about your computer, and then imagine a much beefier version of your computer, and then multiply that by 23,000. Right? Collecting and analyzing consumer data. That's an amazing number. And they have 3,000 data points per person. 3,000 data points per person. Right? What's your favorite grocery store? How often do you go there? What's your mobile carrier? How often, what apps do you have? All of that stuff, all that 3,000, imagine an Excel file with 3,000 columns, and you're just one row, and there's 300 million rows just in the US. That's what we're talking about. 38% of employed Americans' pay stub information is available on Equifax. Right? So if I want to market to people, I want to know how much money you make. Right? Do you want people to know how much money you make? Probably not. I think there's actually a good reason. This is a side note. I think there's a good reason we should talk more often about how much we make with other people. I think employers really benefit from us not having those conversations with peers. But I don't want Equifax sharing that information, collecting and sharing that information with other people. Databases like Campaign Grid and ProPublica have political information, including party affiliation and campaign contributions for 80% of registered American voters. So you give $20 to Bernie Sanders, somebody knows it. You give $10 to Donald Trump Stop the Steal campaign, somebody knows it. Somebody knows it, and it's not just those campaigns. Next, let's talk about harassment. I'll go through. Yes, Monica.
I'm sorry, a quick question. So this is scary, but anyway,
yeah.
Of any data maybe that has helped? You talked about suicide not long ago. Are they trying to, even when they get our information, trying to make a difference, help the community. If somebody's in danger, is there such a thing that they can probably do something about it, be proactive, send the psychiatrist, and I don't know, a team if the person is about to commit suicide, for example. Does it also work that way? So do they know if they are sick, they are ill, they can somehow help that part of the community, the people in like a high risk in that sense?
The answer is not a categorical no that this data is not used to help people. It is sometimes used to help people. The really unfortunate part of the answer is that there's so much more money in marketing to people that that's absolutely the predominant use of this stuff. And public agencies would be the ones entrusted with, like, oh, let's find, you know, let's intervene with people before they have problems, right? And there's no mechanism for that. And I think people would rightly be concerned if the state started collecting, if the city and county started collecting that information, you know, buying this information from data brokers to proactively try and intervene in your life. I think there would be privacy concerns and maybe even legal concerns that don't exist for the marketing world. But there are some instances where big data is being used to develop systems to intervene in ways that can help. MSU Denver actually has one of them. There's a gentleman named Sean Petronovich in our a data analytics department, not our CIS or CS like academic data, but like a data analytics at the administrative level for the university, has developed a giant algorithm in terms of predicting retention. And so what we've done sometimes is he said, you know, here are the students who are on the cusp, right, who may be dropping out next semester. And so let's conduct a campaign to intervene with them. You know, we're going to have professors and advisors reach out to them proactively to try to make sure that they stay involved. Because a lot of times when people you know, don't complete in college, it's just because they needed one or two or three things and they didn't realize that those resources were available. So we lose a lot of people in our BS degrees to calculus, for instance, right? And sometimes it's because they just don't know about tutoring, or they think it's, you know, that tutoring is harder to get or harder to use than it really is. And so if we intervene with them and say, hey, did you know that we have math tutor, you know, back when we had a physical presence, we actually brought calculus tutors into the admin building so that you didn't have to go all the way across campus to get calculus tutoring. Right? We thought that was a potential intervention to help with. But if you don't know that, then maybe you're not going to use that. And so if you reach out to those students and say, hey, you know, it looks like you're maybe struggling or whatever, is there anything you can use? And if we can get them on the phone and they say, hey, yeah, actually, I'm really struggling in calculus. Oh, did you know that there's tutoring? And did you know that it's right in the admin building? Right. And so those sorts of conversations, I've been part of those conversations that have been fostered by the use of big data in-house. You know, school districts have often done the same thing, right? To try to identify students who might need intervention and then to do that more proactively. Hospital systems often are looking at, like, how do we identify the patients who are going to have trouble with compliance? And if we can get them on a better listening to doctor's orders, then we're going to have better outcomes with them. And so there are uses of big data that are being used for what we might call, you know, just to help the person, sorts of purposes. But there has to be an incentive there. There has to be an alignment of incentives. MSU Denver, we care about you. We all generally, I mean, I promise you, for relative to what other schools pay, we choose MSU Denver because we like you and we care about you. I promise you that is 100% the culture here at MSU Denver in a way that is really hard to overstate and continues to blow me away every day. I see how my colleagues interact and do their jobs. But we're doing it because it's in the university's best interest to do it, right? It's in your best interest, but it's also in our best interest, right? Hospitals only started worrying about that when Medicare and other government agencies and insurers started saying, hey, you know, these patients who are the most expensive, you hospitals got to figure a way to bring those costs down in terms of keeping folks who have multiple chronic issues in particular, to keep them out of the hospital. We got to find a way to keep these costs down, and started restructuring the incentives to do that. And that all of a sudden hospitals were like, oh, well, we've got all this data. Let's look at how we can do that. So there has to be an alignment of incentives with an institution for that before that starts to happen.
Thank you. That is positive information. Thank you, Professor.
It is not all horrifying. It is not all horrifying, but also, I mean, I think you you probably still a lot of, I mean, even MSU Denver, and I've participated in this, and I think it's actually good in this case. But I mean, I think a lot of students are surprised, like, oh, you have my you professor have my cell number because the school told you to call me. Like, yeah, I do. And sometimes students are a little put off by that. Like, I mean, we're going to use the data we have. And in this case, it's only data that you've given us or data that represents your performance. And so data we already have. We don't actively, I mean, we're not contracting with Axiom to collect more data about you, I promise. But I mean, I think even in our case, there's some potential critique there to be made. Harassment, unfortunately, is something that is all too familiar for many of you. So this is a study by the Pew Research Center. They're constantly doing surveys about online experiences. And so this is just from 2014 to 2020, right? 7% of people had experienced physical threats in 2014, and that went up to 14% by 2020. Stalking went from 7 to 11%. Sustained harassment went from 6% to 11%. Sexual harassment went from 5% to 11%. Your less severe forms of offensive name calling or purposeful embarrassment are also on the rise. And so any online harassment, people, 6% more people have experienced that since 2014. And the more severe behaviors, that's gone up by 10 points from 15% to 25%. In 6 years. And so we're in an era where again, I'm picking on Facebook because they're the biggest, and also because I think they could do a lot of these things better. Social networks like Facebook are increasingly used as a way to harass people, to stalk people, to sexually harass people, to taunt people. I mean, there are so many. Any of you who I mean, you're all most of you are young enough. You went through. I'm sure you saw people, and many of you probably were bullied with online tools as a key part of that bullying. So this is a growing problem when 4 out of 10 people have experienced some sort of online harassment, and a quarter of people have experienced severe online harassment. They also break this down demographically, right? So this part really surprised me here, that men and women experience it in really similar numbers. A little bit more severe for women. I think this number may be a reporting difference as well. I think women may be so inundated, so used to sort of at least some unkind words and such, that's more like what falls into this light blue bar, that it just doesn't even register for them. And so they say no when the answer actually is yes. And men are probably a little bit more like, how dare you, right? Just enough that answer probably is probably more like even, at least. But here I think is really key, right? The 18 to 29. So again, most of you, not all of you, I love our age diversity at MSU Denver, but a large number of you are in this group where, something like 64% of you experienced some kind of online harassment, including 48%, 18 to 29, have experienced the more severe online behaviors. And the largest group that's most impacted is lesbian, gay, bisexual folks versus straight folks. And so, 51% of folks who identify that way have experienced severe online harassment. So companies could be doing a lot more to prevent this, for sure. I think there's a really solid ethical critique to lodge at them for not doing as well with that. But it gets much worse. It gets much, much worse. And I told you there was going to be a content warning. This is your content warning. If you don't want to hear about sexual harassment online via people who were taken advantage of, minors in particular, who had sexual content posted online without their consent, that's what we're going to talk about here now. And so I'm going to try and sneak in a little bit about another subject at the end of this, but if you want to click off now and then catch up with me later about what you missed on the back end after this, I encourage you to leave now, because this is I'm not kidding. This is stomach churning. And it's a big part of it is that the privacy loss can lead to harassment. Privacy loss can lead to harassment. This is a picture of Serena Fleites. Fleites. She's one of the subjects of a heartbreaking story in the New York Times. It's called The Children of Pornhub. The Children of Pornhub. Again, terrible stuff. At 14, Serena K. Fleites was an A student in Bakersfield, California, who had never made out with a boy. But in the 8th grade, she developed a crush on a boy a year older, and he asked her to take a naked photo of herself. She sent it to him, and this changed her life. He asked for another, then another. She was nervous, but flattered. That's when I started getting strange looks in school, she remembered. He had shared the videos with other boys, and someone posted them on Pornhub. Fleites' world imploded. It's tough enough to be a 14 without having your classmates entertain themselves by looking at you naked and then mocking you as a slut. Quote, people were texting me, and if I didn't send them a video, they were going to send them to my mom, she said. So today, Fleites, 19, off drugs for a year, so that's like 14 to 18, has huge drug problems. I skipped some parts in the story. Off drugs for a year, but unemployed and traumatized, is living in her car in Bakersfield along with 3 dogs that have proved more loyal and loving than the human species. She dreams of becoming a vet technician, but isn't sure how to get there. It's kind of hard to go to school when you're living in a car with dogs, she said. I was dumb, she acknowledged, noting that she had never imagined that the videos could be shared online. It was one small thing that a teenager does, and it's crazy how it turns into something so much bigger. A whole life can be changed because of one little mistake. The problem goes far beyond one company. Indeed, a rival of Pornhub, Xvideos, which arguably has even fewer scruples, may attract more visitors. Depictions of child abuse also appear on mainstream sites like Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook. Right, and so as I started looking into this a little bit, I found a lot of people who were saying, in terms of volume and certainly in terms of visibility, your ordinary social media sites are actually much more toxic and much more filled with this kind of stuff. So while the porn sites are easier to point at because other sites, Twitter and Facebook will take down, well, not Twitter actually, Facebook will take down nudity and pornography if it's flagged, if it's identified, whereas Pornhub obviously does not. So much of this stuff is shared in private groups, is shared person to person rather than broadcast out, or is shared on accounts on sites such as Twitter and Reddit that where with the appropriate content flag, the appropriate warning that this is adult content, actually allow adult content to be shared. And so it's not just about the porn sites, but it's about how to mainstream social networks respond to this issue. And I think it's obvious. It's obviously horrifying. It's obviously horrifying. But I think there's I think it's a hard position for these networks to be in terms of total success. I think achieving total success of keeping all of unconsenting nude pictures of people who did not consent, let alone explicit images of minors, keeping it off their sites is something that they're probably never going to be able to do 100%. But are they doing enough? Are they doing enough? Could they be doing more? Could they be more cautious or more proactive or set up more systems to try and prevent this? And I don't know exactly the answers, to be honest, but I think it's an open question and one that society should ask and that these networks should be asking about themselves. The last topic I want to talk about is misinformation. And this literally has killed people. Online misinformation has led to deaths, has led to preventable deaths, largely preventable deaths from medical causes, With that lead in, you probably know some of where this is going. And if you disagree with me, if you think that what I'm about to identify as misinformation is true, I would invite you to, I would ask you please to save that discussion for after class with me privately. I'd be happy to have this discussion with any of you privately, but I do not want to have a debate about whether these issues are true during class. If you disagree with what I'm about to say, please see me after class, and I'm happy to chat with you. In fact, I want to know more about where you get your information and how you've come to these conclusions, because I think that's it's important to acknowledge and listen. But the time for that is after class, in my view. So. The first well-established source of misinformation that has cost people lives and certainly caused a lot of unnecessary hospitalization and other medical issues is vaccine misinformation, right? And Facebook has taken steps to take some of this stuff down, but they have been one of the more troubling sources of vaccine misinformation in the whole information ecosystem. They've thanks to other people on Facebook has convinced more people of the dangers, the supposed non-existent dangers of vaccines that has led to. I mean, there are parts of. I don't know if this is still true. I haven't looked into this in a few years, but at least there were parts of the absolute wealthiest parts of LA, right? The parts of LA where they're like Porsche Cayennes as far as the eye can see, where vaccination rates for measles were below the rates of industrializing countries, were below the rates of some of the poorer countries in the world. Right, we had measles outbreaks leading to hospitalizations where doctors had trouble keeping up well before COVID, and the Facebook, I think, was justly criticized for doing too little too late to quash this misinformation. Now they have done a lot more lately. They have done a lot more lately to actively flag that, and then during COVID, they've done more. They've been more proactive in trying to flag inaccurate misinformation, misleading misinformation about COVID. And trying to constantly redirect people to, the world experts on the disease, and the even telling people like, here's some rumors you may have heard, and these are not true, right? So they've been somewhat better, information ecosystem citizens around COVID than they were around the anti-vax campaign when that, in the earlier years of the network. But I think there's still more they can do. I think there's still better information that they could put out there, and more false information that they could do to rein in. But I do have some sympathy for the network because it's just such a behemoth. There's so much information posted on it every day, and there's no human editors, right? And so, how do you catch this stuff using machine learning is a difficult problem. And then how strictly do you enforce it using machine learning, right? I've had, not around this, but I've had one of my posts flagged as violating their policy that absolutely did not violate their policy. And but I see how the computer or maybe some person who meant well, at least I'd like to hope they'd meant well, wound up reporting it. So I have sympathy with it, but it's still, I think there's also a point to be made that they've maybe not done enough around this. And then there's political misinformation. Oh my goodness, is there political misinformation? Oh my goodness, is there political misinformation? Now we thought, I mean, like, obviously in the news this week is filled with the discussion that's had something to say about this. But I want to go back just a little bit further and hope that 4 years of perspective can give us a little bit of perspective here, right? So does anyone recognize this restaurant that says Comet? Probably not. This would be like deep political nerddom if you did. I'd be pretty impressed. So this is the Comet Ping Pong, a pizzeria in DC. What the heck? All right. And then, come on. Okay. In 2016, a gunman came in shooting. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. The gunman was convinced that Hillary Clinton and John Podesta and a bunch of other political elites had children locked up in a sex dungeon in the basement of this pizzeria in DC. Why that would be, how that would happen, why that would happen is very, it's very, I mean, I've not delved deep enough into the conspiracy to understand this mindset. But was convinced that in the basement of this pizzeria, there were children being held and used against their will. Among other problems with that theory, this pizzeria does not have a basement. There actually is no basement there. So we have seen the problem of political misinformation further spread as well, and what companies have done about this and whether it's been enough, I think has been an interesting debate. I think using the tools of this textbook, we could come up with a really, in this course, we could come up with a really extended discussion about that. But that's all the time we have. I'm going to leave it there. Sorry to leave it on a down note, but I do hope some of you at least can join us at 2 o'clock for the guest speaker. He's going to be talking about this. I think he'll be less depressing than I have been. I hope so. And also, I think he has an interesting solution to talk about. If you can't make it at 2 o'clock, I will be recording that as well. And I will also post that online so that you'll get a chance to watch both if you're interested. So hope to see some of you at 2 o'clock. If you can't see the recording, check the recording later. And I will see you all on Monday when we will have a discussion about this topic and related topics. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.